Don Cooley won't be here. He's got a
Gene Bean
cold.
Yeah, bad cold, very bad cold.
is in Kingman. Her good friend of hers lost her husband.
No, her husband had a heart attack.
Her husband had a heart attack, so she's
Mm-hmm.
there. Dave Paulson just left. I'm not sure what.
He's gone his way to Carson City.
On his way to Carson City. Let's see, who else are we missing?
Ask Pat, she keeps a diary on all of us.
No, not really. I can't keep track of everybody.
can't.
And Don Cooley is very, very sick.
He's got a bad cold.
Has a bad cold, didn't feel like he could make it out. So we'll keep these people in our thoughts. And hopefully see them next week or so. Today, 2 thoughts for the day. How unusual is that?
I don't know if I
We've
can
had
handle
two,
Can we
it.
handle
we've had 2 thoughts for the day for weeks, with a lot more to go.
I'm not experienced enough to handle 2 thoughts.
Our first thought for today is, why not you? Why not? Scripture comes from John chapter 21, verses 15 through 19. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. I don't know if he said it that way, but that's the way I read it.
That's what you would have said.
Probably accurate.
Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
True. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God, and then he said to him, follow me. And we know that Peter was, in fact, martyred, crucified upside down, and died for his Savior. There is a job to be done, okay? There's a major problem that has to be solved. And somebody says to you, hey, why not you? Get over there and see if you can solve that. Now let me tell you what we usually say. Who, me?
Orange Fazio just came in.
Say, get Pat.
Yes, get Pat, she does everything. Or you can hear somebody saying, you can't be serious. Or there's no way, I'm too busy, I haven't got time for that. I'm not the right person to ask Pat, she's the right person.
Don't ask me.
You know, all those kind of responses.
It's okay.
Well,
Just wants to talk to Sandy about something.
what do you think are some of the reasons why we don't act? We're confronted with a problem, a situation, or something that needs to be rectified or taken care of, and instead of just responding right away ourselves, usually, more often than not, most people hesitate and don't take any action. Why?
There's lots of reasons.
Well, give me one.
We don't want to be bothered at that moment.
Yep. Okay. Oh, I'm really tied up right now, forget it.
Yeah, and the issue may be something we don't wanna get involved in.
Right, I don't want to get involved in that.
And sometimes you just freeze in the moment and don't do anything. And and later you say,
I'm
What
not
happened to me?
qualified.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
qualified, I've never done anything like that, don't ask me.
Or, I'm too qualified, get
Oh,
some,
yeah,
yeah.
Get some simple-minded fool to do that, don't ask me. Or how about just thinking, if we just kind of, I know there's a problem, but if I just kind of step back and sit here in the shadows, somebody will come along and do it, and I won't have to worry about it, those kind of things. Have you ever been confronted with a situation, you recognize the problem, you recognize that something had to be done, you didn't do anything, and then after the fact you felt guilty?
oh yeah.
That ever happened to you? I'll give you a personal example of myself. Years and years ago at Grace Community Church, they were in desperate need of someone to teach youth Sunday school. And a pastor came to me and he said, I think you're the perfect person to do that, teach youth Sunday school. I said, you gotta be out of your mind. I can't teach Sunday school. I don't know anything about the Bible or anything. I can't do that.
The preacher's kid?
No, yeah, well, no, but my dad wasn't the preacher there at the time. This was when Richard Smith was the one who came to me and said this. And I said, no way.
Yeah, but
Absolutely
he
not.
knew you knew something about the Bible.
Anyway, I just begged off on it, and over the next few months, okay, and I'm sure now that he put other people up to it, but there were 2 or 3 parents of youth that said, you know, we need a youth teacher. Why don't you consider doing that? No, come on, get off my case. I don't want to do that. Then they finally stooped to the level of having some of the kids come to me and say, oh, Mr. Fox, we'd really like to have you for a teacher, you know, and this kind of thing. And, you know, I just kept putting it off. And I went down to visit my mom, who was still alive at that time. My mother, when she was here at Grace Community Church, taught a huge youth group. Matter of fact, she would have an excess of 50 young people in her Sunday school class on Sunday mornings. And I went down and I said to her, I said, they've just been really bugging me. They're trying to get me to teach the youth class. She said, well, I think it'd be wonderful to do it. And I said, I can't. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to deal with the lessons and all this kind of stuff. And she told me, she said, all you're trying to do is just make excuses. And she said, you don't have to know anything. All you got to do is put the gospel in front of them and it'll sell itself. And, you know, by this time I was so guilty that I went into Richard Smith and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I've been doing it ever since. And it was kind of like all this time God was saying, you know, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what I want you to do, this is what I want you to do. And I kept saying no, and finally I just gave up. Well, that's just one personal example. Jesus asks Peter repeatedly, if you love me, shepherd my sheep. Now, some people think that Jesus said that to him 3 times for a specific reason. Because just before that,
He denied
he had
Christ.
denied Christ 3 times. So some people say, well, Jesus was reminding him of this whole thing. And so here you have, for example, John, the disciple John. He was the one that was able to do all the thinking, the really theological thinking and all. He wrote on a very high level, okay? Then you have Paul, who was the great missionary traveler. But Jesus had a task for Peter too, and he said, I want you to feed my sheep. So, it is for us to consider, we may not be able to think like John. We may not be able to write on his level. We may not be able to travel to the far ends of the earth like Paul. We may not be able to be a missionary to Africa, for example. But each one of us can accept the responsibility of shepherding someone who needs it. Feeding the Word of God to somebody. And, I mean, why not you? Right? But James Moore says that there was a pastor in the Midwest. He had agreed to pinch hit for a friend in the pulpit one Sunday. So he went early to the friend's church to see what it was like, kind of get a feel for the atmosphere in the church. As he's walking down a long hallway with his sermon notes in one hand and his pulpit robe draped over his other arm, he came upon a big room, at least this large or bigger. And it was a room that was being used as a nursery for preschoolers. Okay? Well, he glanced into the room and he saw this one lone little boy, looked about 4 years old.
No adult in the room?
No adult.
Oh, I'd be furious.
And this one little 4-year-old boy was sitting there all by himself in this nursery room. And the pastor looked in and the little boy said, "Hi, my name's Tommy, and I'm all alone in this big room." visiting preacher, had done a lot of counseling during his years in the ministry, so he decided to use that non-directive counseling technique, you know. And so he said to the little boy, "You feel all alone in that room?" And the little boy said, "I don't just feel it, I know I am alone." "Now, don't you worry now," the minister responded. "I'm sure that before long somebody will come to be with you." And with wistful eyes, little Tommy looked up at the minister and he said, "Why not you?" Well, that's one of the really great questions that I guess resound all down through the ages. But more often than not, we seem to ignore it. We seem to fail to hear it. We refuse to act upon it. In fact, what we most often feel, I think, is that surely somebody else will happen along, somebody better equipped than me, somebody who knows more than I do, and that person will come along and they'll do what needs to be done, and then I'm off the hook.
It works sometimes.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But that doesn't necessarily keep us from feeling guilty about it later. Well, take a quick look at the circumstances that confront us. Ask yourself, how many of these times have you backed away from a job that needed to be done or run off? A problem needs to be solved. A word needs to be spoken. A job needs to be done. A situation needs to be corrected. A person needs to be helped. A church needs to be reformed. Ooh, I don't like that one. A community needs to be improved. A reconciliation needs to be worked out. A word of appreciation needs to be expressed. A wrong needs to be righted. All those kinds of things. With some or all of these, you know what? We recognize the situation. We understand what's going on. We know what something has to be done. We can see it. But what we think, surely there's someone else better suited, someone more eloquent than I, someone who has more authority, somebody who's really more committed. And they're the ones that should deal with the situation because they'd be more effective. I'd probably just mess it up. I'd make it worse. But there are times in life when the question is being put directly to us, and I think God's behind it a lot of the time, and He's saying, "Why not you?" There's a critically important and meaningful key to successful living found in all of this, and it's this. Each one of us are able to do something that should be done. And we are able to take it on, and we're able to do something about it. James Moore says that's actually a description of the great people of faith described in the Scriptures. Down through history. People who heard the call of God as a personal request. I want you to correct this situation. I want you to act. And then they had the courage to do it, to speak out, to do the job. That's about what those people did. Moses, Isaiah, Jesus Christ, Peter, Paul, Martin Luther, John Wesley, Mother Teresa. You can name a lot more if you want to add to that list. Each of them responded creatively and courageously to God's call to do something. And so we see the risen Christ standing there on the seashore that morning and saying to Peter, "If you love me, feed my sheep. Take up the torch of my ministry." Another way of putting it, someone needs to continue my ministry of love, so why not you, Peter? Of course, we know now Peter heard that. He answered the call. He accepted the challenge in faith and trust and obedience, and he went out and he did it. He was just an ordinary guy, just a plain ordinary fellow off the streets, a nobody. The challenge he was given was easily seen as way beyond his capabilities, but he took up the challenge. Now, James Moore says that he would like to make a suggestion. He says that every time that you see and recognize a situation that needs correcting or help, it actually means that simply by seeing that, God is calling you to do something. Just by recognizing the problem, God is talking to you and saying that needs to be taken care of. If you see it, that is in fact God calling you to do something about it. I read that and I thought, oh, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, I know. That means you're gonna
I
be busy.
don't want to hear that.
I'm gonna be taking off my glasses.
I know. Has God ever asked you, why don't you do something about that? Why don't you set this wrong right? Why don't you make the world a better place? And I guess the response is, well, why not you? Why not? Second thought for the day. Boy, I'll tell you what, by the time we leave here today, we're all going to feel guilty as heck.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
We need that.
Our second thought for the day is keep on keeping on. Scripture comes from Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 23 and 20 through 25. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up on meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. If I'm not mistaken, we're not sure who wrote Hebrews, but the writer says in this brief passage, he says, hold fast to our creed. In other words, never lose a grip on what you believe. Oh yeah, that's easy to say, isn't it? Not so easy to do. Because there are cynical voices who try to discourage our faith. There are materialists who try to make us forget about God. There are events in life that shake our faith. But the writer in Hebrews says, keep on holding fast. The writer says, take thought for others. Remember that we are Christians, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of others. Do not be selfish Christians. We must encourage each other to noble living, and we must worship together. And by the way, we should not plan on worshiping together just because we are afraid of being criticized if we don't. And we should not avoid going to worship just because there are a few folks there that we don't care for. And we should not avoid worshiping because we've convinced ourselves, well, the church can get by without me. Doesn't need me. You know, those kind of thinking. The writer in Hebrews says, continuing to associate together as Christians and worshiping together is critically important. The writer says we must encourage one another. Kind words of appreciation, praise, thanks, and cheer has the power to keep people on their feet. He says, keep on doing these kind of things always. Okay, well, that was from Barclay. I just threw that in as a little appetizer, whatever. James Moore says that there was a middle-aged woman sitting across from him at his desk, and she was crestfallen. This is a clipping.
I wonder if you mentioned something about that.
She was burdened, confused, heartbroken, scared. Her husband of more than 20 years had suddenly died 3 months before. Now the grief pains of that loss were eating her up, gnawing away at her incessantly. I still cry a lot, she said, especially late at night. I feel alone. I'm afraid. I don't feel like I can cope. I'm disillusioned. And she said when he died, it seemed like a big part of me died with him. My whole world was wrapped up in him, and now he's gone. What in the world am I going to do? And she said, I have faith. I love God. I trust God. But where is He now when I need Him so desperately? I know He's out there somewhere, but somehow I feel like I have been jolted out of contact with God. I'd be willing to bet that every one of us have had that feeling somewhere along the line. We can identify with this lady and the despair in her words as she cries out for God. And we've known those kind of moments where we're in a desperate situation and we ask ourselves, God, where are you? Where are you? Where have you gone? And then from there we begin to wonder, is there really a God? If there is really a God, why isn't He doing something? Why isn't He helping me out here? We do have our faith. We do believe. We try to trust God. But despite all of that, there are times where we just seem to be completely out of touch with God. Times when our faith is pretty darn hard to hold on to. God seems far away. He may have disappeared from view altogether. These are pretty difficult moments when we experience disillusionment, disappointment, downheartedness. What we really need to know, though, how do we deal with that kind of disappointment and disillusionment? How do we face that kind of thing in some sort of productive or creative way? How can we bring ourselves up when we've been beaten down? How do we mend broken hearts? Most important, how do we keep our faith when it's so hard to believe? James Moore says that one of his most favorite people in his church was a lady. Her name was Marilee Mickle. Marilee Mickle. This is down in Houston, Texas. Marilee. And he said she was a true saint. Said she was not pious. She was not puritanical. She was not sanctimonious. She was a, quote, salty saint. She's full of life and vigor and wit, just a real character. And he said she had two great sayings to respond to disillusionment. The first one was this. She'd say, I'd rather wear out than rust out. And she'd say, we have to keep on keeping on. Well, that's about the same thing the writer here in Hebrews is saying to the early Christians. The early Christians were being persecuted. I mean, those folks were scared. They were confused. They were disheartened. The writer of Hebrews knew this, and that's what he says in Hebrews 10. He says, let's be firm and unswerving in the confession of our hope, because God can be trusted. So let us help one another to love and encourage each other. Take every opportunity to be together and share together and worship together and support each other. And he basically says, don't quit. Don't give up. Don't lose heart. Hang in there. Never quit. So let me review again these three thoughts from Hebrews just briefly. First of all, when you feel disillusioned, keep loving others. Read in different words how the writer of Hebrews put it. Let us stir up one another to works of love and good deeds. And he was right. The best antidote for the poison of despair is to reach out and touch somebody with love. The best way to get over your problem is to get outside yourself, forget yourself, into usefulness. As we reach out to others with love, our disillusionment fades and is replaced by happiness and fulfillment. That's the way it is. Jesus put it like this. This is paraphrased, but you'll recognize it. When we lose ourselves for others, then we find ourselves. Number two, when you feel disappointed, keep encouraging others. The writer of Hebrews reminds us that we are a family, a community of faith, sharing the joys and sorrows of life together from cradle to grave. Encourage one another, he says to us. We were never meant to bear our burdens by ourselves. It's the genius of Christian faith that it recognizes this truth. We solve our problems better in community than in isolation. We all need a support group, a support system to affirm us, to uphold us, to encourage us, and that is the significant part of the task of the church. One of the great personalities in the early church was a fellow by the name of Barnabas. And Barnabas was a great encourager. How odd. His name means son of encouragement. And so James Moore says, may God help each one of us to be a modern day Barnabas, someone who listens, who cares, who affirms, who lifts up, who helps others. If you feel disappointed, the best way to get over it is to keep on keeping on and keep on encouraging others. And then third, he says, when you feel downhearted, keep trusting God and worshiping. The writer of Hebrews put it this way, don't neglect meeting together. And worship was what he was talking about. He's right. We get discouraged, we feel defeated, we need to get into the presence of God. Worship is our great reminder that God is the Lord of life and that He's on our side, that He'll see us through. Nothing can separate Him from us. And I mentioned some people will quit attending church, will quit coming to worship, and they have all kinds of really weird excuses and ideas. But you know
It's
what?
full of sinners.
Yes. Well, that was my excuse when I quit attending church. I didn't darken the door of a church for 10 or 11 years. And my excuse was, the church is full of hypocrites. Well, of course it is. What better place is there for hypocrites to go than the church? And I think I mentioned a couple times before, it was when I went to Grace Church as a teenager. I looked around and I saw people that I just thought were the biggest joke. They were hypocrites. And I thought, you know, if this is what the church is all about, I don't have anything to do with it. I had a woman up in the choir every Sunday. She was there in church on time. She sang in the church choir, sat up there with a beautiful robe on, and just like an angel, she sang right there in the front row of the choir. And as soon as church was over, she went up to the tavern and got drunk. She was an alcoholic. I thought, well, that's awful hypocritical. And there was another fella in the church there. They used to join hands across the aisle at the end of every worship service. And they'd sing the benediction. Like God be with you till we meet again. There was the whole congregation holding hands. And this one old man, he wouldn't do it. He would not hold hands with anybody.
Did he just step back, or?
No, he just stood there like
Oh,
this.
okay.
And finally somebody asked him, and he had a frown on his face, and he said, I just can't stand some of the people in this church. Well, that sounded hypocritical to me. So sometimes we don't go to church for all the wrong reasons. Somebody will say, well, I quit going because I didn't agree with the pastor. Pastor gave a sermon that Sunday, I didn't agree with it. I'm not going back there.
And actually, if you're judging them as being hypocritical, it kind of makes you, doesn't it?
Sort of, doesn't it? At least it makes you judgmental, if not hypocritical. Some people will say, you know what, I was all right there for a while, but you know what, there's just one person every doggone Sunday that should come in and sit right next to me. I can't stand a woman. So I'm not going to church anymore. Somebody says, well, you know, they used to have really nice sandwiches and stuff for fellowship, but they quit doing that, and all they have now is stale cookies. I'm not going back there. Now, these are great reasons for not going to church, right?
We should have everybody in the community come into ours.
Yeah, we
I
should.
know Linda's stepfather, old man Hudlow, he never went to church in his life, I don't think, other than for a funeral or a wedding or something where he had to. And he said to me one time, he said, I'll tell you right now, he said, if I ever step foot inside the church, ceiling would come down on me. And I said to him, I said, what makes you think you're so important that the whole church is going to collapse just because you walked in? that's it for today.
Thank you, Brian.
Enjoy the Super Bowl if you're into football.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Everybody take a nice nap.